think so, yes. Let's go for it.
Let's go for it. Right. Are we all okay with Zoom? You will be by now, won't you? Okay. So sometimes it's good to put it on speaker view, and then you'll get the presentation and the speaker either side, and you can always move the presentation over a bit so you get a bigger person. But I don't mind if you keep the presentation big and the person small, because it will be me. So yeah, you might not want to see too much of that. Well, I welcome you all sincerely. I probably could talk for an hour on loneliness. I don't know whether I will. Let's see how many soapboxes I get on today. But I have got a presentation to keep me sort of in line a bit, I think, because I'm known to go on a little bit. But loneliness has been a passion and a area of work for me for over a decade now, so for quite a long time. So I'm just going to go back to basics and talk a little bit about it and where I'm from, and then work through to the current day. It won't be like that. I'm going to share my screen now and hopefully share a presentation. Ooh, maybe not. Let's get it back up. I love technology. Let's try again. Lovely. Let's try that. So that's better, isn't it? Except for I was in the middle and you can't see that. So I was adding a few slides when I realised I had a whole hour to go. So I'm from Eden Project Communities. Now, most people will know Eden Project as that visitor destination down in Cornwall. And what most people don't realise is that we are an educational charity. So Eden, at its very core, is about sustainability, resilience and social action. And in a way, we use the plants and the biomes to paint the stories of people's lives so that we can show our connection to each other and the living world. So we tell the story of where your cacao beans come from, where your bananas come from, and always about trying to connect people to each other in the living world. Because we know that when people connect, good things happen. And actually that is what makes us sustainable, is that human connection. Over about 12 years ago, Eden decided that they would have an outreach programme. And the main aim of that outreach programme is to connect people to each other where they live. And that's what I do now. It's not what I've always done, but it's definitely what I do now. And I love what I do. Now I've got to try and move this on. There, thank you. So Eden's mission is about reconnecting humankind with each other, nature, through transformation, and to bring people and communities together to figure out what works and how we can work together towards a better future. We don't have the answers, but we like to facilitate the space. At Eden Communities, we want a world full of happier and healthier communities where people know each other and neighbourhoods can thrive. And as you can imagine, in the current climate, this is getting trickier as we move forward. I am really passionate about a place-based neighbourhood approach to things. So when I look at things around loneliness and community, I don't separate it into themes or people or ages. I think it's really important when we're looking at connection that we look at things from a place-based. And our connection with each other, with nature, is a vital part of building up our health and well-being, be that mental, physical or social. And I think we need to feel hopeful about the future. And that's really challenging. But I think we all know that when we connect with someone and we see that connection and we see the benefit that gives us and that gives each other, that helps us be hopeful. It helps us face the many challenges we've got ahead, because we know that we've got other people that we can get through those challenges together. So before I go any further, I want to go right back to basics, and forgive me if you've heard this 1,000 times, to what loneliness is before I talk about loneliness. And you might have already heard it today, so we'll see. There'll be no test at the end. So loneliness for me is that mismatch between the relationships we have and those we want. And I work really hard to address loneliness and isolation, and bring people together and form those relationships. Relationships take time. It is an internal trigger that tells us to seek company, as thirst tells us to drink and hunger tells us to eat. And I often hear people, and I will go on to this a little bit more about, let's tackle loneliness. And I would say I don't want anyone to tackle loneliness. The feeling of loneliness is my alarm system. It is my internal trigger saying there's something wrong. You need people, you need company, you need a relationship. As thirst and hunger tells us we need to eat and drink. You cannot tackle hunger. You might be able to tackle starvation, the lack of food, but every mealtime you will be hungry again. And that's how I think of loneliness. It's the reasons that make us lonely that we need to address, not that warning system. And I think people often talk about loneliness and being alone as if it's the same thing, and it's not. Loneliness describes the pain of being alone, and solitude, the joy of being alone. And I know many people who are happy alone and not lonely, and many people who are in relationships who are incredibly lonely. So I think we must get away from thinking that people who are alone are lonely. It also hides a demographic of people we don't look at. So if we assume that people live in big families, then we assume that none of those people are lonely. And this really hits more of our diverse communities. So we have to think that actually loneliness is that subjective inside thing, and you can be lonely even though people are around. Isolation and social isolation are different things. So isolation is where there's no choice but to be alone, and there is genuinely nobody, and that is a really serious thing. And whereas many of us may seek solitude, very few of us will seek to be lonely, primarily because it really isn't good for us. We have seen stats upon stats about how it's bad for our mental health, our physical health. It increases dementia, cardiovascular disorder, and the combination of all these things. Often people say you're twice as likely to die prematurely if you're experiencing loneliness or isolation. And that's serious. And I think I'll just go back. The reason for that is because when we are isolated or when we are alone, we're away from our tribe or our clan or whatever you think you want to call the people you are around. And back on the Serengeti Plains, when that would happen, we would go into heightened self-preservation mode. So we'd be on high alert because we have no one around us, and we'd be sort of watchful and anxious. We also, after a while, start losing empathy with others when we're alone. So these are prehistoric systems that still work in us. And because when we're alone, we're in that heightened state of fight or flight all the time, it affects our hormones, it affects our sleep, it affects our eating patterns. We're less likely to look after ourselves. We're more likely, I mean, let's face it, if any of us are fed up and sad or having a bad day, we're not reaching for a salad, are we? We're reaching for a bar of chocolate, a packet of crisps, or maybe a bottle of alcoholic substances, which are very nice. I'd say wine, but I don't like wine myself. So we tend not to look after ourselves. And also, if we're feeling lonely, unwanted, unloved, then we will give up. We will give up on ourselves as well as giving up on others. And it's all those combining factors that actually make it really bad for our health. One of the things I think we can stop avoiding, so I really try and make loneliness an ordinary, everyday emotion, which is why I ask people to stop saying tackle, stop saying fighting loneliness. It makes it sound like it's a bad thing. Now, it's not a nice thing, especially when you're experiencing it, but it's a human thing. It's what we are to be human. You know, dying of thirst is not a nice thing, but that's what happens because we're a human being. So I think we've got to think about it as you can live with loneliness. You address loneliness, you cope loneliness. You cannot end loneliness and you can't fight it. What you can do is look at the things around you that are making you feel that way. I think we also have to remember that lonely people are us. Can be any one of us. We'll all have experienced loneliness at any time. We're ordinary people. We're not victims that need saving. And also people who reach out to lonely people are just ordinary people. They're not heroes. We are all humans. And I think we have to accept not only do we feel these emotions and feelings, but we also can help other people to sit with them and live through them and get through them. The reason I look at it from a place perspective of anybody of any age, because I'm really aware not to other people. So there's lots of research that talk about different groups of people experiencing loneliness. And more recent research will show that young people are particularly susceptible to loneliness, as are older people, as are people with mental health problems, as are young mothers, do you know, but as soon as we start separating those people into groups of people, we start lumping them into one group. And actually, we all will feel lonely regardless of age. And actually, a younger person might actually want an auntie or uncle figure, do you know? So I think we've got to think about it as anybody. And you might tailor different activities to different people. But anyone is at risk of loneliness. And we need to think about avoiding the deserving and the undeserving lonely. So it feels like at Christmas, we will see loads of heartbreaking things about older people at Christmas. And there's like a deserving lonely, you know, and everybody will come out to try and reduce people's sadness at that time, because that's when people think of them. And I think we have to think of everybody. And actually, most statistics say that New Year is a worse time for many, many people. So when Christmas is over, when people have stopped putting that effort into families, into homelessness, into deprived communities, whatever, New Year's Eve come and people are looking at a year that could be very much like the last. And that's when people become incredibly isolated and lonely. So again, we must try avoid that deserving and undeserving. And also, we've really got to try and remember it's a personal experience. So what makes me feel lonely might not make you feel lonely. And the only way we're ever going to know why people feel lonely or what's making them feel lonely is by listening and talking and asking the question. We can't forget that loneliness does not just kill people, it kills our communities. So if I feel disconnected, lonely, nobody understands me, I will start to withdraw. So you won't just lose me as a person, you will lose me as an asset in that community. And the chains break. And I think we have to remember that actually we need to draw people out. People are often fearful around safeguarding, but often regulation kills kindness and reduces action. And I think this is one of the positives in the response to COVID-19 that we have seen, that informal action has given people permission to respond without all the formal layers of regulation that sometimes prevents people from getting involved. That said, lonely people are vulnerable people, and we have to remember that we need to safeguard each other and look after each other. I often hear people talking about resilient communities, and I think we have to remember that there are stepping stones before that. So human connection and community confidence is what builds resilient communities. So unless we've got those cornerstones in place first, then you're not going to have resilient communities, and more we need them. Again, communities and neighbours need permission or a reason to connect. And I think we have to also think about the stepping stones that we need to put in place to support people to continue that engagement and connection. And we need to be putting that back. We are not independent. We're not meant to be independent human beings. We're meant to be interdependent species, and we rely on one another. I've looked at loneliness for the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. I think it was about 2010, so it is a decade ago, using participatory research techniques. And we looked at a neighbourhood approach to loneliness. And I think this is what has given me, and you know, I got a message from Kit in one of those neighbourhoods this week, I think it was at the weekend, who'd just got an award for Nellie, which was the New Earswick, New Earswick Less Loneliness Initiative, Nellie, the elephant in the room being loneliness. And she just got an award for continuing to do that work and support people who are lonely and isolated in that area with the Nellie Cafe. I have not been there for over 7 years, and that work continues because those people believe in a place-based approach to loneliness. We need to think about how we make every connection and conversation count, and actually that we listen to people. It's really important we reduce that stigma. Everybody has a stigma around loneliness, and it's really important we do whatever we can, and if that's talking about it ourselves, to help people know that it's safe and it's an ordinary thing. Most people who feel lonely will feel that they're a burden or a nuisance, and they won't want to put on others because we've all got so much on at this time, and we have to help and support people to express how they feel. Again, we need to give people reasons to connect and stay connect. And one of the big things, and I'll come back to this, is about how we prioritize the time to connect with each other's, and how can we be kind. There's this thing about creating an us and a them. So that is the biggest challenge with working on a place-based perspective. So as soon as I create an us, as soon as I create an area, I naturally create a them. So it's really important how we keep that cycle and that inclusion going, so we try and mitigate the creation of them, and that we create a we. So there are just a few things we need to look out. Many of you, if you've been around the loneliness world for a while, will have heard about the permission of snow. I think this has been usurped by the permission of corona, but we'll get onto that in a minute. So the permission of snow, snow gave people permission and time for their humanity to come to the fore and for them to go check on their neighbours. So if it is snowing, people will go and check and see if people need shopping. They might help someone up the road with a buggy. They might clear the streets. You might make a cup of tea for the person clearing the streets. You also see who has not been visited. You see where there are no footsteps. But also what snow gives you is a gift of time, because nobody is expecting you. So snow gives people permission for their humanity to come to the fore and to reach out. What happens, however, is when snow dissipates, so does that level of care. So does that reaching out to the neighbours. And that's the same with flood, fire and crisis. Coronavirus has given people huge permission and time for their humanity to come to the fore and for them to care for others. And I think it's a long crisis. It's an ongoing emergency, so it's much more complex than that. But even now that we see that we're not all facing what we thought we were, the same common enemy, and different people are shifted at different times, we've already seen that level of care and humanity start to fracture within society. So has the crisis dissipates, and it might take a few years, but that level of care for our neighbours and our communities will also dissipate. And we've seen that post-war and post-crisis time and time again. And I think what we really need to think about is many of the issues that come from lockdown. So we often hear about the positives, but we did a poll, and there was just like 23 million people face mental health issues. Under 24s and single parents are really negatively affected. The under 24s, as I say, are feeling most lonely and depressed and unlikely to sleep during lockdown. Half the population are worried about another pandemic could happen. And here it is, a second wave on its way. A lot of people are really worried about their mental health. And I think mental health, isolation, and loneliness live in similar spheres. They're very different things, but they live in similar spheres. A lot of people are feeling vulnerable right now. And I think it's natural that we are human and we are fragile and we are vulnerable, but very rarely have we been reminded of our vulnerability. A quarter of us experience this corona coaster. I know I do, probably within a day, let it alone within a week, where I am focused and working and really on it. And then the next minute, I think of the big picture of the second wave, of recession, of Brexit, of my family. And I become so overwhelmed that I don't know what to do. And I feel a little bit helpless and hopeless. And I think more and more people are going week in and week out without someone to talk to. And I think this is really worrying for me, because that continuity of connection and conversation is what happens when we start to talk to people about how we feel. I'm really, really worried about people who came in to this situation, COVID-19, and will come out still lonely. So they were lonely before and they were lonely afterwards. They may even be resentful. They may be living in one of those communities where they haven't seen a resurgence in neighbourliness and kindness. And actually, it has made no difference to their life. I'm worried about those people who are lonely and stressed because of the triggers that cause loneliness. So we know that life circumstances cause loneliness: births, deaths, changing job, changing house, all those tipping points in your life. If you don't have a strong support network, make you vulnerable and susceptible to feel lonely. And if we think about just those who are bereft, when I think about the loss people have experienced during this time, the complicated grief, unable to say farewell to people properly, I really worry about them long term. I am really concerned about the legacy of loneliness that may feel. But also there's the flip side for that. So I was talking to my colleague, and I was asking how her mother was, because last year she lost her father, and she went, you know, she's absolutely wonderful. Her neighbours are there, everyone's checking in on her, everyone's around. She feels like she's got her community back, you know, and she feels like it matters and she matters. She's now more scared that actually when the world starts to move back, that she will lose that again. Do you know? And I've also heard of people who've been able to volunteer and have been engaged in their community, and now they've got to go back to work. They can't do that no more. And they're feeling like they're missing out. So I think we really need to think about those sort of things. But also there's a positive for a lot of people. This space, this time, this connection to nature might have restored their well-being. So I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but I do think we need to remember and think about different people and different things that people may be experiencing. I think we need to think about the people we care for and the people we may be worried about. I think most of us will know someone who's lonely, even if we might be experiencing loneliness ourselves. And I do, and thankfully it's fleeting because I've got good support networks, but sometimes I can get stuck in a rut with it. But we often will ask people, or we won't start that conversation, because I think we're worried that once we ask someone if we're lonely, or once we find out for definite someone is lonely, then this is our job to fix that. And it's not our job to fix that. We can't, you know, but we can be there for that person. We can say, yes, that's just shite. That's awful. Do you know, we can be there and we can be with them. And that is a start of them being open, accepting. Half the time it's accepting and naming how you feel. You know, you've got to name it before you can move on and know how to deal with it. And also when you are feeling lonely, you probably feel really vulnerable. Some people feel ashamed. Some people feel there's something wrong with them, you know, and how people need to build up slowly. There is no quick fix for this. There is no silver bullet. The opposite to loneliness is intimacy. Not the rude kind, get your minds off that, but it's that intimate relationship. So that person who knows you, who you don't have to explain yourself to, you know. So if you think about that, it takes a while to build a relationship like that, you know, so there's no quick fix. So what we need to think is about actually, how can we cope with this? How can we get through this? What can we do in order to look after ourselves and look after others until we can build those bonds and those relationships? And I believe we all can make a difference because we care and because we can be kind. I mean, even when I go out, so before I did loneliness, I've always been, I always say I'm a product of community development worker. I was that isolated single parent in a council estate, and a community worker reached out to me, and I volunteered for 9 years and studied, and, you know, it was amazing. But when I worked, I'd do lots of people stuff. And then when I finished work, I'd be like, I'm sick of people. Where's my garden? Where's my dog? And I wouldn't talk to people on the way home because I'd been peoply all day. And then when I did the loneliness stuff, and I just thought, actually, this is not about a job. This is not about a career. This is about being human. And now, much to my beloved's despair, I talk to everybody. I try and make eye contact with everybody. I will smile at someone because just to say, Maggie, I see you today. You know, I will smile and say, you know, I see you, because I just think there's something really important about being seen and recognised, and that someone else knows you're there. I think we have to remember anyone can be lonely, including you. Okay, but anybody can reduce loneliness, our own and another's. I want you to think about how you look after the health and well-being of your communities, your colleagues, but also of yourselves. How can we give that gift of time when we lead busy lives? How can we connect with our family, friends, and our anchors? And I'll explain that in a minute, to address loneliness. But most of all, how do you give yourself permission to prioritize your relationships and your connections that are there to sustain you? And I think this is really important. So I was thinking about COVID, new lockdown. I'm a people person. I've always been working in the community, and now I'm sat at home in this office. A beautiful office, don't get me wrong, and I'm very fortunate, and I have a garden. I miss people. I am renowned for my hugs, whether you want one or not. No, I do ask. But often everybody who wants a hug gets one off me. And I miss that. And I felt myself becoming quite sad. And I thought, I need to do something to get through. And I've been going to Slimming World for a while. I know this might seem like it's off track, but to try lose weight, 20 years, I think now, on and off. And I thought, this is silly because I know how to lose weight. And what going to a Slimming World group doesn't do for me. It doesn't talk about the guilt I feel or the shame I feel when I eat, or the fact I'm eating to fill an empty space, or any of those things. And I thought, who is it that I can talk to about those things? And from that thought, I now have my anchors. And I ask every one of you to find your anchors. So I have 3 friends. We all want to feel better. We all want to support each other during lockdown and COVID. We do want to lose weight and be healthier, but that's not the priority. Some of us one of them wants to get out and walk a bit more. I want to be active and just eat normally, not dieting and not, being a glut, but just trying to find that balance again. And there's 4 of us. And every Tuesday morning, we meet, we have a socially distant walk, and we Zoom another member who's in Sheffield. I prioritise now those 4 people, including myself, those 3 people every week, because they are my anchors. They are the people who are going to get me through this. And there was a huge big meeting at Eden one morning, and I didn't go. I sent my apologies because on a Tuesday morning at 8 till 10, that is what I'm doing. I am looking after me because I am the resource. And I think you all have to remember that you are a human being, you're fragile, you're working in a crisis. There will be times when you will feel overwhelmed, lonely, maybe despairing, a bit sad and disconnected. Who are the people you can laugh with? Who are the people you can talk to? Do you know? And if there aren't anybody and you've got in that head funk and there's only you, what is it you can do to get out of that? Do you know? So what people also don't say is that loneliness can be a very therapeutic place. People can be very creative. I have never wrote a happy poem in my life. I've wrote some very sad ones. Not that I'm going to share them here. But you know what I mean? It can be a creative space. So I think there's really, really consciously accepting what it is you are feeling or thinking, and being conscious to think about, how am I going to get through this? Do you know, what do I need to do? Not just to help others, but to help myself. And I think we have to remember, although there is a permission of snow, we all need others to get by. We're not individual, isolated human beings. We are meant to be together, and we are meant to be there for each other. So I think that's all I have to say. I think we might have time for questions. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see your beautiful faces. Any questions? Have we been busy in chat or not?
There are some things in chat actually. People agreeing with some of the things that you've said. There's some information about the Australian government resources, Head to Health, which I think is really useful. Rachel Smith-Light has agreed with your comment about people showing signs of being fed up and losing sympathy for neighbours. An agreement about the Corona roller coaster, Corona coaster. So there's a few agreement for various
I'm quite
things
happy if anybody wants to disagree with me as well. But we've got, I think we've got about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So you can either have a gift of time and go away and do your homework, which is thinking, what am I going to do to look after myself, get myself out of a head thunk, and who are my anchors? Or you can ask me some questions. Either way, it's work.
I'm sure there must be some questions.
Susan, my love, come to my rescue. You need go.
Hi, I really like loads of the stuff that you said. I'm really worried about Zoom actually. I don't know what, I'm sort of asking you what you think about Zoom, because on the one hand, yeah, it's bringing people together. I mean, I'm able to probably go to more talks, conferences all over the world if I really want to, but I also don't really have to engage with them at the same time. And trying to be in a community group here, it is really difficult because it is just the same people, and you've got to be pretty confident on Zoom as well. And more and more, the solution is do it online, connect, we can teach everybody online, we can't, but, and it's just too easy to say that. And I do wonder where we would be with all of this if we didn't have those technologies. But also we are excluding so many people who do not have the connections, do not have the latest laptop, do not have the space, all of those sorts of, or just don't want to be seen and heard this intimately, because it's pretty close, like I've now put my video on, which sort of I don't know what you think about Zoom.
Well, it's a complex matter, and anybody join in. And I absolutely agree with you, which is why I think our neighbours are important. I think the highlight of my day is a dog walk, when I bump into neighbours and actually talk to real human beings. Not saying you are real, but they're in 3D. Do you know? And that really matters. I think the thing about a visual is it does trick your brain, and you are seeing people, which I think helps. If you think of most of our communication, only 7% is verbal, the rest is body language. So actually to be able to see someone a little bit, you can pick up on those other clues. But it is not a replacement for people meeting face to face, and that's becoming incredibly difficult. So there's a couple of things I want thoughts and reflections to share. So my daughter, she probably won't watch this, so I can talk about her, that's okay. But she is an isolated single parent with 3 children, living in a deprived, don't like that word, community. She does not have she has a phone, she doesn't have a computer, she doesn't have a laptop. She'll have Wi-Fi, but she doesn't have a phone SIM, so you can't ring her. Do you know, she's got social anxiety, she's got lots of problems, and she does not want to meet new people or friends via Zoom. It terrifies her. That's not what she wants. She wants to make relationships with real people that matter. Do you know, and all she's getting, she wanted a doctor's appointment the other day, and because they can't ring her, because she's the number's been turned off, but I ring her through Messenger and WhatsApp, they wouldn't deal with her. I had to get them to ring me in order to explain her symptoms, which were quite private, in order to get an appointment for them to see her. Now, if she didn't have me, do you know, then where would she have been? Do you know, she'd have been struggling by herself, not even be able to get to the doctors, you know, and lost access to mental health services because she doesn't have a number no more, and they're not coming to do visiting. They just assume she's disengaged. So I think there's a real problem for that, which is why when we're out and about, and I try, even though the weather's crap, to garden out front or to be out, to try see people. I send people cards. I am absolutely passionate about sending people cards, postcards, my neighbours' cards. I take things round. I'm probably annoying. I'd rather be annoying, do you know, and then capture people or let people know I'm thinking. It's a real problem, and I don't know the solution. I'm also worried about young people who have just been given more permission to live their life online. Do you know, it's become hugely acceptable to do everything online. How are we going to form those relationships in the real world? Do you know, it's a real complex and challenging place to be in. The digital divide, the lack of access to Wi-Fi, it is always our poorer communities or our older communities that suffer, you know, because even if you have got the tech, you might not be able to use it. And I think it's up to those of us who have and those of us who can to try reach out and help people. And even if it is a good morning and taking a paper, or if it is showing someone how to use the iPad, I think we have to keep those relationships in the real world wherever we can. And if the time being that's a phone call and a card, then that's fine. That's a phone call and a card. So I absolutely agree with you, Susan. It's really challenging. Yeah, it's a bit like the monster you create, isn't it? That you need to use it in order to grow and learn. But how do we make those? Has anybody made a really close bonding relationship through Zoom that they didn't have prior to this? No, and that's the problem. We have many, many connections. We have great conversations. We can be inspired. We can feel part of something bigger. But where's our relationships coming from that? In whatever group we do, we normally put people in pairs. So they can just say good morning to another person. Do you know, in our work, we'll do that. But actually, where are those real relationships coming from that keep us sustained? And if they're not going to come from new ways of communicating, we need to go back to our old relationships we've got and restock them, do you know, and look after them and really invest in them. I don't think that answered your question, Susan, but there were my reflections on it. Don't know if anybody else has any more. Oh, Peter raised a hand. Where are you, Peter? Hello, Peter.
I'm not invisible because I don't want to be. I'm broadband disabled. You obviously said it in what you said this afternoon. Thank you very much. It certainly makes you think about your own position. And some people who know me, I spent 10 months in Addenbrooke's, and you couldn't get any more lonely than that. But actually, strange enough, I wasn't lonely because the staff were so intensely interested in my well-being. But the loneliness, actually, when I came home from hospital, was when all the family went off to school and work, and being alone there. And I think it's admitting you're lonely. I think that's the first step that people have got to do, to admit that they miss other people. I mean, I'm of a generation, as you can see, well worn, that was brought up to believe in the stiff upper lip. Really, that you didn't show emotion, you didn't do anything. No, pull yourself together. And actually realizing that, when you start talking to the dog and the cat and things like that for company. So how do we reach out and reassure people that you're lonely is not an act of weakness?
Yeah, I think you just have to say it. And I think that's what I encourage people to say, is to talk to others and go, actually, I'm feeling lonely. I don't expect you to fix it. I know you can't fix it, but actually I'm working with this and I'm dealing with this. Because as soon as you, and I think you have to position it in that way, because I know when I've been lonely, I'll have my friend go, well, you can't be lonely, you've got Mark, because she doesn't have a Mark, so she's like, what are you on about? You're lonely. But it's the mismatch, and people will start to turn into Mr. or Mrs. Fix-It. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Why don't you do that? And I often say there are many busy, lonely people. There are many, many busy, lonely people. And I often say even busy people can be lonely too. And that's why I put it in there. I think you should say, actually, I'm feeling lonely. I really miss people, and really sit down and think about, actually, who are your anchors? Who are the people you can touch base with? What is it you can do? I know it sounds naff, but I don't like the dark nights, and I know that winter's going to be a trouble for me. And I'm like, how am I going to get from 5:30 to 10:30, which is bedtime? That's 5 hours. What am I going to do? And you just think, 5 hours, I can't sit and watch telly every night. And I was trying to think of a hobby that was not worthy, I suppose. I don't know, but something I know I would enjoy. And it was actually my daughter that reminded me I like glass painting. And I do. So I've asked my beloved for loads of glass paints. They're not cheap. But it's that sort of thing. Actually, some of the gaps you can't fill with what you need. So what can you do instead? So some of it is about trying to distract your mind as well. So being really open to how you feel and think, well, actually, while I'm feeling like this, I'm going to do this because this actually makes me feel better. and I don't need another person to do that. So yeah, I don't know whether that helps.
Yeah, the other thing was, I mean, somebody said earlier on that you said about not making, friends on Zoom, but from my point of view as a counsellor and with other counsellors, because we are a disparate group, because we're always separated by this political divide. The strange thing is that I feel I've got to know my fellow counsellors better via Zoom, that perhaps we've become a bit more relaxed with each other. We actually realise we're out here stuck in the same Zoom isolated booths. Do talk, and before and after meetings, we have lowered those guards.
Yeah,
we've recognised that the political thing is just almost a sham, just ordinary people.
Yeah, and I think that's beautiful, and I think that's something that you can build on. So those relationships were there already. They might have been formal relationships, but they were there, and you know each other. And what COVID has been able to do is put our human side forward. They've broken down the barriers between our work and our home, because it's all the same place. So it's very hard to put your suit on and go to work when you've still got your slippers on and, the dog's barking at the postman and stuff. So that's a beautiful thing, and I'm really pleased. And I think if any of us can try and encourage any of those, might be formal groups we're part of, to actually, let's be a little bit more informal, let's be a little bit human, let's look after each other. I think that's a wonderful way forward.
There's quite an interesting question in the chat, actually, Tracy, about whether you have any ideas for using nature for activities that are out of the ordinary.
Out of the ordinary? Ooh. See, I have quite a lewd mind. Who asked that? No. Oh, I'm sorry. I won't be lewd. Out of the ordinary. No, not really. To be honest, I just love walking and getting out there and looking up. I often take photographs of the sky, of the moon, of dewdrop on a berry or something. And I'm not that arty type of person, but just so I take time to stop and notice those small things. I think there's lots when you start to look at connection with nature. And I often say connection with the outdoors as well, because there's a lot of people who assume nature is somewhere else to go to, like a wood or the seaside, and that's where nature lives. And actually it's about being outdoors. And I get outdoors every day. Thankfully, I've got a slobbery black Labrador that makes me get out. And I think it's those sort of things, noticing leaves falling or things change, and that's when I can see people. So I suppose my getting out to nature, the purpose is to try bump into as many people as I can, not go to a place where I don't think there will be any, because I want to say hello and stay out round where I am. What I have done, again, because it's the dark nights, is brought battery operated lights for my greenhouse, so I can go in there and play and go into my shed and play, because I won't, because there's no lights in there and there's no electricity. So there's something about lighting up different spaces so that you can access them on an evening as well, because the days are so short, and especially when you work. I found a lot of my team are now working flexibly, so they're now working in the evening so they can enjoy the daytime. So think about how you live. And actually, is there any need to work 9 till 5? Not that I ever have done, but, can you have a long lunch? Can you go for a morning walk and work later? What is it you can do just to get outside? I'm sorry, there's no original thoughts there. I'm not that creative. Were there more questions, did I see?
I think you've got a couple more. You've got one from Councillor Rachel Smith-Light, and then one from Anne Osborne.
Ugh. Right, do you want to say them to me then, because I can't read them?
Yeah, thank you. You can just call me Rachel. I don't have to be councillor necessarily.
I was Rachel. I was just going to call you Rachel anyway.
No, I'd gone formal all of a sudden after all of the other sessions.
I don't need it, bless you. No, just thank you. It's been really interesting, and I just think just a sort of observation. I mean, I'm glad Peter said what he said, because I agree. Actually, I feel, well, not oddly, but I feel like I've got to know definitely some of my colleagues, councillors and officers for that matter, a bit through the Zooming thing. But you're right, it's not a substitute wholesale, because those relationships had already begun before, pre-COVID world. But yeah, there has been a surprising connectivity. Is it not? I don't mean in the sense, in the human sense, which has been surprising to me and a good thing. But I do worry sometimes in relation to young people, not just young people, but sometimes I've noticed that people will talk about young people. Number one, as they're a foreign country, which of course they're not. And number two, this assumption that they all love tech and gadgetry and IT. And that's so dangerous, because they don't necessarily, number one, but even if they do, it's not actually doing them a lot of good. It's replacing as the real relationships and real connections in 3D that you've talked about. And it does worry me that there's this assumption that because they're young, that they're all happy to be on social media or Zoom or whatever it is all the time. And that's now being disproved, as been said. But and it's not just them, it's me as well. I think we've got to, as a society, as a species, really be careful that we don't think, oh, well, yippee, we can all do this now forevermore. That's fine, isn't it? It definitely isn't fine. I don't think it's fine. It's not fine for me. And I wouldn't want people's COVID terror to sort of stop them from ever, interacting properly again. I've had COVID, just as an aside, and I know I'm not in the vulnerable group, I'm not 65, whatever it is. But I'm proof that you can have COVID and recover from it, and it doesn't have to, harm you permanently in some way. So I'm just saying that because I want to, reassure, wrong word maybe, but I want to say that, we don't have to let this completely dominate forevermore and not see, I'm extreme by saying not see each other again, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I'm
going to stop now.
Yeah, no, I think what's really interesting, especially with media, I suppose, and the news and stuff, that they don't necessarily report the whole thing that's happened. They magnify a certain bit, don't they, depending on what mood they're in. And I think that magnification of different groups of people, different aspects and what we're doing is what's worrying, because if we didn't do that, and I think for young people, you're absolutely right, there is an assumption that they like it. And I think what we have to remember is they might have been raised with it, but that doesn't mean that they like it. They might know it, but that also means they don't have access to it. So I think that's a really good reminder, Rachel. Thank you. Anne, my lovely Anne, I've hugged Anne. You see, I'm really worried. I've hugged Anne loads of times, that before it was stranger danger and people wouldn't talk to each other. And like you said, now I'm so fearful. Hugging will never come back.
I know.
I'm terrified. Even
and in
when
the past, if anybody was within 5 feet of you, they were hugged. So,
yeah, it's just. But I think it goes back to that touch. Someone mentioned touch. Yes. Touch is such an important thing. I mean, yeah, I do go randomly around hugging people, but touch is such an important thing, and I'm really concerned about that moving forward. Sorry, Anne.
No, well, actually, I would just say that in all the years that we've been running the Coffee Caravan, the lack of touch is something that gets talked about an awful lot. If you live all by yourself, if there's no other heartbeat in the house, you're not touched. Nobody touches you. So we do a lot of hugging and hand holding in normal times. But no, I just wanted to kind of just to say that you cannot underestimate the importance, or none of us should underestimate the importance of looking after ourselves, like you said, because we're all trying so hard to make a difference, and we're coming up against a lot of people who are feeling very low, very sad. I've been privileged to be able to award money from a hardship fund over the last couple of weeks, and it's been really emotional, a really draining experience. And you just cannot pour from an empty jug. So I think that it's vitally important that people take notice of what you said about making time for yourself and remembering that you really matter, that you're really important too, because you can't be what everybody else needs you to be if you're not looking after yourself. So I just wanted to just kind of emphasize the point that you were making.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. And I think something I haven't is, if there is a time now it's a time to be honest about how you feel. And I think that's something people have given us permission to do, is to be human, to be honest. So I suffer with anxiety, depression, blah, 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 numerous stuff. But a couple of weeks ago, my anxiety was rife. And I'm like, when I'm anxious, I can't do this. I'm like, I can work, but put me in the background. Do you know what I mean? Because it just overcomes. And most people don't know that about me, and they don't believe me. but it's true. And I was able to say, and I was working in partnerships with lots of other people, but because of the topic and what we're doing, I was able to say, my anxiety is really through the roof this week. Can I go in the background? Absolutely. And not only did they say absolutely, they thanked me for being open and honest and for sharing that. And I think the only way we can encourage other people to be ordinary, to accept who they are and that we are human beings, not machines, is to be a human being ourselves. We can only be ourselves. And I think if we say, I am sorry, I am not coping, or actually no, my time and me doing this is a priority, you'll have to rearrange that meeting, or we'll have to do it another time. If you start doing that, you role model and give people permission to do it as well. I mean, it might be a slow snowball that builds, but I think we've got to start somewhere.
You gain trust that way as well.
Yeah. Well, you're
when
honest.
I lived in Australia, it was called being real.
Yeah.
Just be real.
Yeah.
Because we talk openly about loneliness at our coffee caravan visits. I talk about my own experiences of it. It's just being real and giving other people permission to be real.
Yeah.
And there's some interesting comments in the chat as well. I know it's been flagged up about the change in the guidance about those who are seen as vulnerable, and the change from it saying over 70 to over 60, which some people have already responded to. There's also a comment from Sam about geocaching and that being a good excuse to get out, being an online scavenger hunt, which give you a purpose to walk if you haven't got a dog. There's also a comment from Sharon Harkin about the East of England co-op project in Essex that they did called Best Life Youth, but trouble getting young people to engage, and they're just a comment that young people have got Zoom fatigue and don't want to participate via Zoom anymore. And just last one from here, I just thought the comment from Dave was really nice. When we first went into lockdown, I noticed nature was louder because there was no traffic or distractive noise. Something as simple as that on a walk really made me smile.
Yeah.
So I think we're probably out of time now, Tracy. We've used all of our hour with you. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Really, really appreciate it. Again, it's been thought-provoking, and I think a lot of what you say, I think the bit that stuck out for me is the bit about looking after ourselves as well as trying to look after everybody else. And that's probably something we all need to think about. But yeah, really thought-provoking, and really appreciate your time. So thank you for joining us. And thank you everybody for joining us. This is the end of the last session. Thank you. Some of you have been with me all day. So thank you for that. I appreciate your
well
efforts.
Done,
Excellent day, Nicole.
Well done.
Excellent day.
Well done.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
It's been really, really great. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you. Good. Great to see you all. If you do want to join any of the other sessions, there are still the focus is transport tomorrow, digital on Thursday, and then a bit of a look about the impact of COVID on Friday, and a bit of an overview of the week and what's come out of it. So please, if you do want to join any of the sessions, then do go to the East of England LGA website, and all of the event information is still there. So thank you very much, and big round of applause for Tracy virtually. Thank you.
Hugging.
Yeah.
Hugging.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.